up everyone, I'm Amanda Ross and welcome to my channel. Today is the first day back of fitness / cross-country schooling after the winter break, so could be a little bit exciting. And we're going to start out with putting some studs in. So we're going to do a stud video. I have Lewis, Zarzy and Vendi here. The other two are at home, they'll start next week. So let's see how we go. These are the two stud kits that I use. The bigger one on the right is the main stud kit, and that kind of lives in the truck. It doesn't really come out, and it's got enough studs to run a team of 5 horses at a show. And the one on the left is my kit for 1 to 2 horses, and I'll take this with me if I'm only running a small amount or if I want to go overseas. This is a really good kit to take because it's way smaller and lighter. And the silver thing in the middle, that's a magnetic stud dish. Really, really handy for putting your studs in when you go to put them in the horse. One of the worst things, which if you've done this once you will know exactly what I'm talking about, is losing a stud either in the shavings or the grass or the dirt, because they're really hard to find. So put the studs in the dish when you go to put the studs in the horse, and also when you've taken studs out, instead of putting them in your pocket or trying to hold them in your hand as well as multitasking and undoing studs and holding up feet, pop the studs straight into the magnetic stud dish and they'll hang on to them for you. So this is my stud collection from the very smallest to the very largest. There's one thing that's really consistent with all of these studs, and that's that they have a tungsten core. So you'll notice that each and every one of them has got like this darker piece of metal in the center. Now that tungsten core, it's like a rod that goes all the way through the stud, and it is a really, really hard metal, and it means that the stud won't wear away around the edges. It will always keep its point. And this one here is a really, really good example of that, because you can see where the edges have worn away, and yet that tungsten core is still really intact. The reason I really like tungsten cored studs, in fact I actually don't use anything else, is because Australian conditions are so hard that the stud just wears away. And because we need a pointier stud to impact the really hard ground that we have, if we don't have a tungsten core, it all just turns into a rounded off stud, kind of like this shape, which if you're trying to pierce through really hard ground, it just causes a jarring effect and it doesn't do the job of piercing through the ground and giving the horse that extra grip. So these 4 studs are road studs. Road studs are generally just used, imagine if you were on a bitumen or a really hard surface that you thought if the horse spooked or it might get a little bit of a slip, it would go sliding. So these are like, it's almost like a bigger nail. So these guys here are just really flat and broad, and you'll notice even though I say that all of the studs have to have tungsten, there's one, which is this one, and it doesn't have a tungsten core. And that's basically because it's so flat to start with that it can't really wear and lose its point because it didn't have one in the beginning. These 4 also get used if I want to take the studs out between phases. So say I'm show jumping in the morning and then 4 hours later I'm going cross country. I sometimes put these in because it stops the holes getting blocked up, and it's just really easy and quick to take them out and put the studs in that you want for competition. And the horse, it doesn't matter if he lies down or whatever, he's not going to scratch himself or hurt himself having studs in. These next 4 here are a pretty small stud. They're the smallest ones that I have, and I must say I do use these the most. You can kind of tell. They all have a tungsten core, and they are pretty tiny. They're great for dressage. They're great for show jumping if you just want a little bit of grip. And remember that you're really looking for the horse's footfall to be as natural as possible. So although we want to minimize the slip, so studs are obviously in there to give the horse grip, we don't want to jar it and stop its foot from having that natural slide on landing. So these ones are just really small, and they generally pierce the ground really easily. So as I said, great for dressage and good for show jumping as well. These next 6 studs are more of a medium size stud, and they're used for when the ground is wetter and slipperier and deeper. And obviously I've got a few sizes and shapes here, so they're all roughly the same height, but width-wise, you can see they're all pretty different. So this big fat one, as you can see, it's pretty new. I haven't really used that. That'd kind of be for quite loose ground, something that was easy to penetrate, and you just didn't want the horse to slide. So obviously wider ones can give him a little bit more base grip. The pointier ones really get into that sort of harder but slippery ground. So Australian ground is like that, obviously pretty hard, not a loose sandy soil, and not like a sort of maybe a more European old turf. So these ones you'll notice are all pretty narrow. This one in the middle, obviously a little bit wider, this one a little bit wider, but the other ones are all pretty narrow, so they basically get into quite hard ground. And you can see this one has had quite a bit of use, been quite a favourite. These ones here are taller again, so I'd say when the ground is actually more muddy, like quite a bit more muddy, or you've got a bigger horse, I use these ones. And on back feet, I rarely use the bigger ones on the front feet, because the front feet are the ones that land after a jump and they need to have that little bit of natural slide, whereas the back feet don't land the fence, so the whole horse's weight isn't on that back foot at the time, but they do push off, so they need a lot of grip when they push off. Again, you'll see these ones are all a different shape. So the one on the right hand side is pretty wide, the one in the middle is really narrow, and the one on the end is actually quite blunt. So I haven't really used that one very much, because I feel that the conditions that we have need a pointier stud, and it's a little bit blunt. And if it is too blunt, they just jar the foot, because the stud doesn't go into the ground as cleanly and easily. And we want to minimise jarring, obviously, at all costs. These big buffers I really don't tend to use. Most of my horses are only 16 hands, they're pretty tiny. So if I was going to run these, I'd be thinking it would be a really muddy condition and a fairly big horse. So they don't get a lot of use, but again, you can see different shapes. The one on the left is obviously more blunt on the top. The one in the middle's got a good ground piercing top, and the one on the right hand side really is going to get in pretty hard into some seriously muddy ground. But as I said, my horses are tiny, they're like 16 hands, and I just don't want to put a really big stud on them. So as you can see, these studs all being the same shape fit perfectly into the stud screwing in device. So it's really easy to use this when you go to screw the stud in. You slide it over the top and twist it around. So it makes life really easy. So what should you put in your stud kit to make sure you've got absolutely everything you need? Firstly, you need a stud kit box that is the right size to fit all the stuff that you need. And this one is obviously used. This is from Bunnings, and what I like about it is that it has removable sections. So you can make these wider or narrower depending on what you want to fit in there. Plus it's got enough room at the front here to fit the longer things like the spanner and the tap and all the other bits and pieces. Most importantly, you need a hoof pick. A few farrier's nails so that you can pick the dirt out of the stud holes, a stud tap so that you can clean the thread in the stud holes, a spanner so that you can wind the studs in and take them out, a trusty magnetic dish so you've got something to hold your studs in while you're taking them out or putting them in, and your choice of studs. Just to give you an idea, these are my most favourite studs. So we've got a flat road stud, then I've got the smallest version of these three here, which is my probably dressage / firm ground show jumping stud. Then we've got the gold super pointy stud, which I don't use that often in the fronts, but very often in the back, sometimes outside front. Then I've got these next two, which are just the same stud, but we've got a big one, which is usually a hind stud. So is this big? This is a real mud runner, this one. These two are back ones. This one is often a back one, or on a bigger horse this can be a front one as well. And I really like the shape of these ones because they fall away at the sides. So if I put them in a front foot, for me it feels like I've got less chance of them standing on the coronet band of their opposite foot. I figured explaining this without the horse attached to the shoe was going to be a lot easier. So here's your stud hole, and you can see in there the threading of where it winds in. So what you got to do is you get your tap and you start to wind in the hole. What's really important is as you wind in, you don't force it, because if you wind in on an angle, you will end up doing what's called cross threading, and you'll ruin the line of the thread. So basically you can't smoothly screw a stud in, it gets stuck halfway. Now, being the width of the shoe, you can see here, if I screw this tap in too far, it goes beyond the width of the shoe. And given the horse's foot is sitting on this side, sorry about my disgusting fingernails, you'll end up putting too much pressure and sometimes damaging the surface of the horse's hoof. So always make sure that you only ever go flush with the base of the shoe. And you'll notice this because if you screw in here, you'll notice the edge of the shoe slightly lift off the end of the horse's foot. And it's going to be minute, but you really do need to make sure you look for that. Now you've cleaned the thread, the next thing you want to do is put the stud in. So same thing, you really need to make sure that the stud goes in straight, and you can guide it in to start with your fingers. And once it starts to hold, sometimes if they're really clean, you'll be able to wind them in by hand, but most of the time you're going to need your spanner. So this is the spanner that I was talking about that connects well with this particular shape of stud. So you pop that over the top, and then you wind it in. And you'll notice that your stud, the neck of your stud shouldn't be any longer than the hole in the shoe. So obviously it depends on the width of the shoe. If you had finer shoes, then you have to be very careful that they weren't any narrower than the length of the neck of your stud. So to explain that a little better, you want to make sure that your stud neck, so this bit with the thread on it, isn't longer than the width of the shoe. Now you can do, there's also popping this stud in, so this one has to be screwed in with a spanner because it doesn't fit the other special spanner. So you adjust this to fit. So I told you this is so much easier than if we had to do this with a horse. Screw this in, make sure it's really, really firm. And you see obviously this one doesn't come out either. And they do need to be firm enough that they're not going to come out. Oopsie. Lefty, loosey, righty, tighty. There we go. And then you drop it. And now I'm searching for it in the shavings because I didn't have my magnetic dish handy. Studs in when they don't quite go flush with the shoe. Look, you can get away with this, but ideally take it out and rethread the shoe thread, and then even stick the farrier's needle into the hole and just make sure that you don't have a little stone or any gunk stuck in the bottom, because ideally you always want to have this stud flush with the bottom, because remember, if it's not flush, then it's also going to be making that stud a lot higher, so it needs to be flush. That's better. This stud's a little older, so often that will happen. And you need to clean the actual thread on the stud itself. Now, when you're putting in uneven studs, the problem with this is that the horse then lands on the ground unevenly, unless the ground is soft enough to accommodate both studs sinking into the ground completely. So you can really see this, the angle that the shoe is on. So the horse is going to be stepping onto the ground. If those studs don't absolutely 100% dig into the ground, the horse is going to be walking onto that angle. So this is another reason why you can see how much higher the shoe sits off the ground. So this is going to be your horse's foot. If you leave these studs in, or if the horse is standing around on concrete for a while, it's really important to take them off as soon as you've used them. Now, if you were, this is the off hind. If you wanted to run a smaller stud on the inside, you would do this because the horse, you don't want to risk him standing on his other hind foot with a really big pointy stud like we've got on the outside here. But you need to make sure that both studs are going to sink into the ground. What I tend to do is go for a stud that is a little bit higher but blunt, so I have less chance of the horse standing on itself with a really pointy stud. The shoe's way more evenly balanced now, having studs of the same height, so even though one is a little more pointy than the other, at least the horse is off the ground and its hoof angle is the same. So you can see that also from side on, you haven't got this really big angle. And that way the horse's natural footfall is going to happen a lot better than if you've got that shoe on a real angle. When you've kind of used your studs an awful lot and they start to look like this, old and rusty, welcome to the Bunnings Frost 40-piece tap and die set. Now, my farrier put me onto this, and to be honest, I don't even know what half these things are. So you need to select the 3/8 die. So you can see all these ones here have got a different number on it. 1/8, this little tiny one here, It's like really, really teeny weeny. That's whatever that is, 4. Once you've fitted the 3/8 size die into its die holder thing, get your stud and start to wind it into the die. Now, this should actually be a little bit hard to do if they're old and really need a clean, whereas these ones I did not long ago. So you just wind them in, and it can be a bit of an effort until you get to the bottom. And then once you've got all the way, wind it out again, and you will have cleaned the thread on your stud, and they will be way easier to screw into the shoe. Now, I actually found this kind of with my stud kit. I actually don't even know where it came from. I think Mum found it and gave it to me, or she got it somehow. Anyway, it's really, really helpful because it can grip stuff, and it's got knives and stuff like that, so it just kind of lives in my stud kit. Anyway, I call it a minutment because it sounds like a random thing that has lots of uses, and it's actually been really handy, so that's really cool. Now, this is your standard stud tap, and it has kind of like 3 parts to it, 3 ends. It's like 1, 2, 3. I had a little bit of trouble with these, and so my farrier got me this one, and it's got 4 edges to it. So you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4. I find this cleans the stud holes way better than the other one, but I've had to rig it up in some kind of weird fashion. So that is my stud tap arrangement with 4 ends, which I find cleans out the holes better. I was having trouble getting the studs in with this variety, particularly once these edges wore off here. And I was saying to the farrier, oh, I can't get the studs in, there's something really weird, and I cleaned all the studs. But anyway, I found out that I needed to get a proper machine grade tap, and voila, all the problems are fixed.
You're so handsome. Do you want me to shut that?
Okay, we've got a little stone in here. Can you see in there? This little stone. When you get stones, they're really annoying. So clean out as much as you can around the outside. Here we go. And you might be able to flick it out. Otherwise, I'll just try and... Oh, there you go. Oh, anyway. There it was. This little stone, these size stones love to get in your stud holes. So if you want to pack your stud holes with cotton wool and Vaseline, that's a really easy... Thanks for watching my stud video. I hope you really enjoyed it. Don't forget to press like and subscribe for more videos. See you next time. Bye.